Ophir, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited to talk about dust identity because what you guys are doing is really, it's fascinating. It's a very unique technology that just always love learning about new things that are happening in the tech industry. What you're doing is really deep and fascinating. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But before we get into that, let's talk about your background. So what were you doing prior to starting Dust Identity?
Yeah, so we spun off the company from work that we've done at MIT and originally at Columbia University. So my technical background is I have a PhD in applied physics from Columbia, and that's where I started to work on the use of diamonds for quantum application, and that's also how I met the other two co-founders, Professor Dirk England from MIT and Dr. Jonathan Hodges, our VP of Engineering. We started to work together around the use of diamonds for quantum applications, quantum computing, quantum sensing, and that's how we started working together.
So what led you down that path of doing that type of research?
So my specialty was around using exotic materials for the semiconductor workflow, where most electronics today is made out of silicon, or the main substrate is silicon. But you sometimes want to introduce new types of capabilities, such as, for example, holding quantum numbers at room temperature. And it turns out that diamond and other exotic materials are sometimes better suited. But the question was how to incorporate those materials into the semiconductor workflow. It's a very strict environment, and there's very well-known and very well-engineered processes. And when you're introducing a new material, you just need to think through of everything that has to do with that workflow. And part of my PhD was around developing those strategies for certain materials.
Now, DUST, from what I've learned, it's an acronym, right? So what is DUST? What does it stand for? Like, what is it?
Yeah, so DUST it stands for Diamond Unclonable Security Tag, and it's actually also because when we apply the dust tag or the dust material, it looks like dust. So it looks like very small particles that sometimes have a whitish or transparent color to them. And when people look at them and they don't know that we exist, they just assume that there's just dust, like the natural dust on an object.
Got it. Now, so how did you end up commercializing this and start to build a company around it? And what are the general use cases that you see for the product?
Yeah, so we started the company around, as I mentioned, the use of quantum diamonds for various applications, and especially around sensing. So being able to detect very small magnetic fields in certain environments was quite interesting. We're talking about scales that are in nanoscopic and very small fields. And DARPA was originally backed us as a company. They gave us the first contract a few years ago to really develop how we make the material, how we make quantum diamonds, and how we develop the hardware and software that is necessary in order to comprehend or understand what the diamonds are telling us. And about 3.5 years ago, through that engagement with DARPA, we started to be more familiar with supply chain security concerns. Our program manager at DARPA put us in front of people from advanced manufacturing inside the DoD, and we realized that there is this fundamental problem of being able to trust objects. If you think of a replacement part for an aircraft, or a hard drive that goes into an autonomous system, or a circuit board that goes into a data center, in all those places, not knowing what you're getting, not knowing what you're holding in your hand has a multiplying effect. It's not just the value of a luxury bag that can be impacted if the bag is not original. It's the asset behind, or the asset that the element is going into, the article is going into, that can be heavily impacted. Either it's the uptime that can be impacted, or it's security, it's fundamental security. So we already know of instances where there's a potential mode of attack that involves using hardware in order to penetrate and basically have an attack that happens behind the firewall. And we wanted to be able to build some capabilities that will help resolve or reassure entities that what they have in their hand is secure and trustworthy, and they're not introducing new risks into their assets, defense platforms, critical infrastructure, and telecom infrastructure as well.
And how does it work? Like, so there's like, how would a company actually do the coding, tracking, and then, there's like backed by blockchain too, right? So how does it actually work through the process?
Yeah, so maybe to start, just think of what we're doing as really running like a credit card processing. Essentially what we're doing when we're verifying or validating parts is running a credit card verification process. We don't use credit cards, we use diamond dust. And think of the diamonds that are applied on the surface of an object is creating that credit card, that fingerprint that is very secure, that will allow us to authenticate or associate data with that object. Then you have the point of sale, which is essentially the scanning device that we're using to verify those fingerprints. And then we have the clearinghouse that typically resides on the cloud that allows us to verifies those transactions and associate data or processes that can be triggered by the authentication. So as you mentioned, yes, we are writing into blockchains whenever it's necessary. This is not something, we're not a blockchain company, but we work with blockchains. As an example, we're an SAP partner, and we developed a product that is interfacing with the Hyperledger Fabric node that SAP developed. But we want to be pretty agnostic to how data is being managed, because actually within the same supply chain, you can have different data topologies or integration into different systems of record as the object is moving in the supply chain. And we wanted to create this identity layer that sits actually behind or below the data layer, such that we can authenticate objects and then pull the data whenever it's necessary from different entities.
Got it. Okay. So what's the current state of the business in terms of your scale, growth, hiring?
Yeah, so we're actually actively hiring now. I think that we have probably something between 7 and 10 open positions that we're looking to fill before the end of the summer. So the company originally was sponsored through DARPA. We came out of stealth in November using the seed funding that we got that was backed primarily by Kleiner Perkins. And now we're closing our next round of financing that will be hopefully announced sometime during the summer. We're 12 people today, and I hope that we'll get to above 20 again before the end of the summer, where the primary focus is around building and enhancing our technical capabilities. So we have a core team that is extremely dedicated, really professional athletes that know how to write code very well and know how to develop hardware very well. But we definitely need more help. The level of engagements, the number of engagements, and the topic that we're dealing with just require significant more investment in the team.
What's it like working at Dust Identity? I see in the background there, it looks like a lab.
Yes. So we are a full stack company, not in terms of just the software, but actually we're making materials. So we have on my left-hand side, you can see our production facility. This is the R&D. This is where we make certain elements of our solution, the diamonds. And then on the other side, you can see a glimpse of our engineering space where we develop some of the hardware and also do some of the initial analysis. So typically the workflow with the customer organization is that after we identify the type of concerns that they have around their supply chain or their value chain in general, we would typically absorb certain articles or certain elements that they want us to develop a protection around, and then we'll provide them with analysis before we actually try a deployment within that use case.
Well, if you are interested in considering opportunities at a company that's building very meaningful technology, that's groundbreaking, incredibly innovative, check out Dust Identity's biz page on VentureFizz, which is venturefizz.com/Dust Identity. And there you'll see a complete list of their openings. Ophir, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through kind of the history of the company and what you guys are up to.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.